it was the first time ever that I'd ever experienced what a panic attack is. And it's genuinely like magic because it completely like overrides
Hmm.
your conscious mind. And
Like, so there was this
yeah,
tremendous amount of impending doom, and I accepted. I'm like, I'm accepting that I have this feeling. I'm accepting that my worst fears could come true. In accepting it, I was able to sort of see through it in a way.
and the main goal that I had with the story was I wanted to take an atheist and a believer, and by the end of the book, the atheist is the believer and the believer is the atheist. That's
That's
the
cool.
yeah. You can conceptualize a an author and their story as the puppet master and their puppets, but weirdly for me, it feels kind of reversed. It feels like they're the puppet master and I'm the puppet, and I'm just having to go along
Oh,
with
wow.
what they're figuring out. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Going quite well. How about yourself?
Going pretty good.
All right.
I see you got a piano there. That's cool. You play piano?
Yeah, kind of. I play a bunch of things. I You can't really see them in the rest of the room, but I'm kind of surrounded by instruments. I've got an electronic guitar and electronic drum set over here, and a bunch of Native American flutes up here. So I've just kind of got things all over the place.
That is really cool.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm musically inclined, and so I like to play whatever I can get my hands on. And this is the newest acquisition, so I've been playing that whole bunch.
I also do I do piano. I also see you have painting behind you, and you're
Yep.
I think so you paint as well.
I have not been actively painting for years now. I used to do it a fair bit more, and I just don't really have the space for it right now. Um, and both physically and mentally,
Hmm.
funnily enough. But yeah, I used to do it, and mostly like Bob Ross's Joy of Painting, oil on oil kind of style. That's what I kind of grew up watching, and so learned how to do that a little bit. So
I've
yeah,
done a little bit of that too. I feel like even though I've again, just like you, dabbled in a very, very small amount of painting, I feel like kind of the perspective Bob Ross gives of like this kind of ability to like sort of layer things on top of each other to kind of create this cohesive like that understanding like stuck with me
yeah,
beyond even painting, I feel.
yeah. You need dark to see light. That sort of thing. Yeah, absolutely. Um, it's it's kind of hard though. It's really you really have to understand color because otherwise you can end up with something that's really flat. And some of the paintings I've done are rather flat, but even then I sometimes like what I end up doing. But yeah, it can be difficult. But yeah, most of what's behind me I painted except for like one little thing which is this one, which is a Tory gate that was a I commissioned my dad to do that because my dad is fairly artistic, and a lot of my my interests have kind of um, trickled down from my family. Whereas my dad's both very artistic and also rather technical. He was a programmer for many years, and I'm both like that. I'm artistic and also very technical. I work in IT. I'm a computer guy, so
That is a cool combination. I think I have a bit of the same. My dad was a programmer, sort of maybe not as much as your dad, but way a longer time ago he was.
mm,
And um and I think he's like really artistic. He never did art, he did construction. But so then I kind of jump out of the frame a bit to do art, but I feel like I really inherited that technical or that kind of engineering aspect to it. Um Now, so like writing is your main form. Like you've actually written a book.
yes, yeah. That was writing the book took me 7 years, but I'm also kind of a slow writer.
Oh, wow.
I've got, do I have a, normally I have one just at hand. I'm not sure where it went, but anyway, um, I've been writing since I was about 15 or 16, although I know that I've had interest in writing ever since I mean, even much younger, like down into kindergarten. Um, but I didn't like start taking it seriously until I was about 15, 16 years old. So that's now like 13, 14 years ago. Um, and it became a way to be able to express just ideas and characters that started showing up in my head. And I, like I would come up with a character and I'm like, oh, okay, this guy seems really interesting. Okay, now I need to write down a story for him. And that's that's just how that ended up coming to be, really. And uh it's it's really fun, and it's also it takes a lot of time.
Now, I kind of had a lot of questions going into this. I'm not sure if I'll remember them, but like, what? So it sounds like what you're describing is that it was kind of an exploration of your own psychology to write to some degree.
Yeah, yeah, and it both my own and also trying to understand other psychological standpoints. What was what really blew my mind when I first discovered Jordan Peterson was I was I'd already been writing for years by that point, but uh, Peterson started giving me language to real psychology, and philosophy and myth and all sorts of things like that. And so I'd be learning these things from Peterson, and I went back and reread things that I'd written, and I was finding what he talked about
Hmm.
in what I had written. And I was like, oh my gosh, I knew all of these things, and I was like putting them in this story. And to me, that was so cool. Um, and
Wow.
yeah, yeah. And now that I've got even like better understanding of psychology, now I can be more conscious about how I'm putting it in instead of it just being subconscious. Although I feel like there's still a lot of subconscious stuff that gets into it. But I can at least be a bit more intentional with what I'm trying to achieve and what I'm trying to explore. For instance, one thing that I'm trying to work through in the sequel to the one book that I've written is I'm trying to figure out I'm trying to figure out how to redeem a nihilist. I'm not really sure what I'm doing, but that's one thing that I'm trying to explore. Is like this one character has gone from he went from being a very faithful believer in the faith of his world, and he's become very nihilistic and very uncaring. And I'm trying to work my way through how can where this character has ended up in, can he escape from that? Can he be redeemed from what he has become or what he is becoming?
Hmm.
So yeah, that's
I
one of the big things that makes me love writing is
I just had
exploring.
an idea. I'm wondering how this lines up with that, or if it could all be relate. But I had an idea about um, Christianity. Um, in that I had this idea, and I don't think this is necessarily what everybody thinks, but I had this concept in relation to Jordan Peterson's ideas where you can maybe get to Christianity by sort of the classical way, by by having faith in God and going that direction. And then you can also get there if you follow truth. Like if you just are really, really deeply honest and you don't necessarily hold on to, a savior, but you can potentially get there as well just by having sort of internal congruency. And so that's where I could see a nihilistic character being nihilistic, but sort of on a deeper sense in a very Christian way, because there's something about Christianity where it's very, very, you know, logic. it's very, very coherent, and so the internal coherence could, but maybe I don't like. What do you think about that?
So like, would that be something as in like maybe is someone nihilistic in that sense where they've like been brought up in it, and so like they know things, but somehow they've turned away from that? Are you talking about like that?
I would be talking about nihilism in the sense where somebody is like, "Oh, I can't figure out conceptually how there's a meaning," and they're sort of like internally um honest and rigorous, so that's why they're getting nihilistic, is because they're sort of doing the work, and they're like, "Well, I just can't see any meaning in life."
Okay, so they're okay. It's like in seeing it, and then they're not even like within their own study. They're just they don't like feel anything. Like it doesn't. It seems like this outward ethereal nothingness that doesn't hit ground in their soul. Is that kind of does that sound like what you're getting at?
Oh, like that's an interesting description of like the feeling aspect of it. I was thinking purely of the analytical aspect to it. You're taking into account sort of
Hmm.
the the way that it feels, and so the nihilist would be in that way because they have more of these emotional responses, like, well, I don't feel like there's a God because, well, how could there be evil? Like these more
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So okay. I think I'm hopefully I'm understanding what you're getting at. So you're talking more on the analytical side. So like
right.
in their thinking, they're like, well, there's no way I can know this, and so how could it be true? Ooh. Um.
Well,
Yeah.
well, maybe better than answering that question, like you did just, I guess, sort of get to the root of what I was going for, but like, what is the nihilistic character in your story? What kind of nihilism does he have?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. His his path into nihilism came out of a place of naivety primarily. And it wasn't that he was uneducated or anything. It was he he had a goal, and he was very very locked in through a religious mindset that we have this goal, heaven is on my side, and so the enemies we're okay to defeat our enemies because they're on hell's side, they need to be defeated. We're going to go do that, and it'll happen. And then he ends up recognizing within their enemies that they're also calling out for heaven. They're also calling out for the gods. And that makes him go, oh, they're like me. And then ultimately, when they finally accomplish their goal, and what really gets him is their whole goal is they're out to try to kill these two particular people, and they fail in getting one of them, but he's the one who ends up killing the other. And it was a very intimate kind of killing because he stabs the guy in the throat with a dagger. And so it's very up close and personal for him. And that moment when he finds it in himself to kill someone this close and personal, it kind of traumatizes him. It really shakes him. And the end result that he finds out was that killing this guy ended up being completely pointless. And so he ends up in this like kind of catatonic state of like everything we just went through, all of this suffering, all of the death, the pain, and I was thinking that heaven was going to get us through this nice and easy. And then it was all horrible. Well, how then does he even care? And so he ended up gaining a mindset of like, well, the gods don't care, because why else would this happen? Why would this have all been meaningless? And if it's all meaningless, then, well, to hell with everything. What does it matter? And so that's how he ended up coming into that.
Hmm. That is very interesting. Well, hearing you talk, I just get very interested in it. I know that like you have a book, and you, in order to like you don't want to give away the story, like you want to leave some of it for people to want to read the book. But I I am curious, like to what degree you could talk more about your writing, more about this, because I am just finding this very, very interesting.
Well, I don't mind talking. I don't mind. I mean, if you're interested, I don't mind kind of going into anything that you're curious about. I, 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 I do try to hold back from anything that's like too spoilery, but even what
Hmm.
I just told you was actually fairly spoilery. So, but yeah, and anything, and I mean, one thing uh, that I like talking about in regards to it is kind of like what I was trying to accomplish with it, and how it turned out. And the main goal that I had with the story was I wanted to take an atheist and a believer, and by the end of the book, the atheist is the believer and the believer is the atheist.
That's cool.
Yeah, and that's who becomes the nihilist, is the believer kid. And I was kind of surprised in the atheist who becomes a believer, because by the end of the book, he's only sort of a believer by the very end, and he's still in a very confused state as to like what his positions are in relation to like the gods of his world or anything like that. He's like, well, I always thought that, all their scriptures and everything was so silly and nonsense. um but now I'm kind of like, I can kind of see why people would need something like this. And so that's a big portion of what the sequel is trying to explore, is how do you redeem that nihilist character, and where does the believer go from the point that he had reached and starting to gain a greater appreciation for the divine. And so that's what I'm currently trying to figure out.
Wow. Um, what what led the person to, and you can definitely hold off on spoilers because I will probably just want to ask things that potentially are spoilers, but what led the person to be a believer?
um
It sounds like it's a bit more of an emotional thing because you described it in terms of like he saw the need for why people would need that.
yes, and it came from a great amount of emotional turmoil for him, um and largely his own guilt for things that he had done that he knew was wrong. And the consequences of it came back to punch him in the face, basically. And as a result, he felt lost in like a void, is kind of how I describe it. He's been stuck in this void. And oh, I just lost you for a second. Are you still there?
Yeah, yeah, the internet cut out just for a
Oh,
second. Now
okay.
I'm back.
Yeah. Um, so he was like stuck in this void, and he's trying to figure out, well, how can I get out of here? How can I escape the guilt that is eating away at me? And uh, I, the answer, this kind of has to be a spoilery answer, but this is more or less what happens, is he ends up encountering Christ, and he has this kind of short conversation. He has this short conversation with Christ. He's in prison, and this random stranger who happens to be Christ sits down with him and starts talking to him and just kind of asking him what's on his mind. And so he's telling Christ about how he's trying to figure out how justice can be real. Is like, is justice real? Because all of these things have happened. The bad guys have seemingly gotten away with it. Me here in my sin am just suffering away, and it seems like I'm just stuck. And like how I don't believe in divine retribution, the afterlife, or whatever. And so like how can justice be done to me for what I have done? And Christ's answer to him was, I am real justice. That's what he tells him. I am real justice. And it confuses the heck out of him. He's like, what is that supposed to mean? It's like, you like, and Christ straight up tells him, it's like, yeah, you don't have to believe in this pretend justice now. You can simply believe in me. And he has no idea what to do with that. And then Christ ends up leaving, and he leaves in a way that he's also uh, kind of implies he's like, yeah, he's on death row, so he's going off to be executed now. And so that leaves the main character just being like, well, you just told me this crazy thing, and now you're just going off and gonna die. And he kind of sits with it for a while, but he has this realization of, oh, I need to take that phrase, I am real justice, and I have to take that to heart, and I have to become the person who embodies that. I actually have to repent and make right all the wrongs that I have done in whatever way that I'm able to. And so that's where his paradigm shifts.
Wait, now just one clarification. The It sounded like you were saying he was talking to Jesus, and then Jesus was going to go on death row, but that didn't make sense because, or
Well,
did I misunderstand that?
yes, sorry, yeah. So Christ is appearing to him as like a character within the world. It's not like a this um like a divine moment or anything. It's a very mundane kind of setting. And I mean, the story doesn't make it clear that it's Jesus. It doesn't say, like, he calls himself Leon. He's the lion, and that's what Leon means. And so he introduces himself as Leon, and he's just another prisoner there in the prison. And that whole thing is kind of meant to conceal that it's Christ himself
Oh,
coming
very
into the
cool.
story. Yeah. Yeah, so it's basically me trying to hide him in the book. uh
Wait, does the reader know that it's Christ going into the
no,
story?
no, they could probably get an idea, but it's not explicitly stated anywhere. Um and what one of the things that happens is, and this is the part that I think is the coolest part, I can't believe I came up with this, but one of the one of the biggest kind of indicators that the main character is going from an atheist to a believer is, at the end, he decides to give himself a new name. He gets a new name, and he takes it from the man he spoke with. He calls himself Leon now. He's like, I want to be called Leon now. And so, in a very symbolic way, that's him taking Christ's name upon himself. And so going forward from that's what he's trying to embody the spirit of Christ going forward in his life. He's kind of becoming the first Christian in his world, because Christianity in the world's not really a thing. They've got a kind of a similar thing to it, but it's um the mythology of the world is basically completely fictional. So like um there's the gods, and then kind of the snakes is what I call them. And so like there's heaven, who's like the main god, and then there's paradise, Elysium, Zion, and Valhalla. And so they've like this, you know this group of 5 gods that are kind of watching over the world. And so it's those 5 and then like another 5 like Hell and Hades and Sheol, and so they're all named kind of after places that are mythological places, but they're like the gods and the snakes in this particular world. Um, so yeah.
That is absolutely brilliant. I think having Jesus be an actual character in the thing and not telling that to the audience, I suddenly wonder if that is like actually what good writing does. It takes characters which are not really characters at all, but really like divine archetypes in some deep sense, presents them like a character, and then the person has this feeling that they're really interfacing, confronting something which is very, very deep, even though it
Mm.
expresses itself as a character. I never thought about it like that before. Like literally just take the character or take the archetype, put it as a character, and then have it.
Yeah.
Don't.
Well, I mean, that's what C.S. Lewis does with Aslan. And so it's very similar to that. Although with Aslan, he has Aslan as a very reoccurring kind of character. And Leon in my book, he's there for 1 chapter and that's it.
But in your book, the reader doesn't. Does the reader ever know that it's Jesus?
No.
So that's.
They'd have to understand that through like really hard thinking, probably.
Mhm. Well, but that's where it's a bit different than Narnia because the person like I
It
think
is a little
people.
more explicit, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so then the other characters, like you said, snakes, is it the same thing where the reader doesn't know that they're snakes? Or like could you describe a snake as a character?
Yes, so they're not they're referred to as the snakes. That's kind of their moniker. So it's like the sentinels and the snakes. And so that's like the mythos in the world. And so it is uh I'm going to bring up my I have a little world building sheet because I can't sometimes the names change and I just want to make sure that I'm getting them all right. So I know there's Hell, and he's kind of and each one is kind of meant to embody different things. So like for instance, they'll each embody like 3 particular traits, whether Christ-like or demonic. And so like heaven, his particular traits is mercy, humility, and love. And then Valhalla is patience, honor, and knowledge. Zion is justice, peace, and truth. Elysium has joy, freedom, and endurance. And paradise is compassion, wisdom, and kindness. And then there's the snakes, and they're essentially just complete opposite counterparts to heaven and the rest, which is there's Hell, who's embodying ruthlessness, pride, and fear. Niflheim, which is restiveness, treachery, and ignorance. Hades, who's got lawlessness, distress, and deception. Tartarus, who's misery, bondage, faint-heartedness, and then Sheol, cruelty, folly, and maliciousness. And they don't necessarily appear within the story so much as um, they're more of just kind of like a background lore in the book. Hell appears actually in a very direct way because one of the characters in the book has his particular magic power. Whenever he uses it, ends up with a direct communication with Hell. And so anytime he starts using his magic, Hell just starts talking to him and is trying to trip him up, essentially. And so he's got a fairly real presence every once in a while.
Wait, you said he's doing magic, and then when he does magic, it kind of has a communication with hell?
Yes. So the particular magic system with the book is it's based on emotion, and this is kind of the whole inception of this book. Was I was just going to bed one night and I was just randomly thinking maybe it was really cool if magic was emotion, or emotion was what powered the magic. And so from there I kind of developed that idea. And so the magic system in the world is it's not magic, it's emojic. There's not magicians, there's emogicians or emogicians, however you want to pronounce that. I undecided. It can be either way. And so there's like 32 different emotions that I decided each one of these different emotions has a different corresponding kind of power to it. So each one does a different thing. And so there's one character, and his particular emotion, funnily enough, is kind of lack of emotion. It's indifference. And whenever he's using indifference, and what it does is it basically cancels out anyone else trying to use their emotion magic. When he uses indifference, that's what ends up uh, with this connection to hell. And so hell will just start talking to him when he's using his magic on someone else.
So then how does the magic work? Like how do they so they invoke a spell that is a emotion and that it's like it becomes them. How do they invoke it and then how does that play out?
Yeah, it's not that complicated. Um, it's basically a practice of willpower. Like they have essentially the emotional energy within themselves, and they draw out that emotional energy. And it does take some amount of physical exertion, because if they overdo it for too long, it'll knock them out. So there are limits on what they're able to do. And they also have limitations as to the extent of their power, kind of arbitrarily decided whenever they've gained that particular emotion power, because it's kind of random. Because I didn't want to try to come up with anything more complicated than it's just randomly decided, or however powerful I need them to be to make the story work. And because the magic system as a whole, when you have 32 different emotions that do all these different things, then that gave myself a really, really hard job to write a story that didn't have plot holes. Because then it could be like, well, if this kind of power exists, well, then why didn't a character with that just do this and solve this problem here and there? And so it's a really difficult task when you give yourself such a really complicated magic system, that I wanted to at least simplify some of the aspects of it, like just using the magic. They can just kind of do it as a matter of will, as long as they're not overexerting themselves.
And then what is it that it does? It gives them the emotion, it gives them indifference, it gives them
It
anger or something.
Yeah, it doesn't make them feel the particular emotion. It's the what determines what emotion it is, because each person, and it's not every person. Some people don't have any emotion magic at all. It's determined at a one-time event when they're feeling the particular emotion like really, really strongly. So, for instance, the main character, he's an orphan, and he's just bored of his life. He's sitting around with nothing to do in the orphanage, and so he's just becoming more and more bored. And all of a sudden, he gains the powers of boredom as an emotion. And in using it, it doesn't make him bored or anything. It's just that the boredom is the particular emotion from which he is drawing from. Um, Hopefully that answers that question.
He's drawing from the boredom. Well,
Yeah, it just becomes like within himself, and he just has it as like an energy pool within him that restores over time. And
what's the positive effect of it? So he's drawing from boredom, but then what does it give him that would make
yeah,
him want to invoke it?
yes. So it gives him the ability to do two different things. He can draw it out, and this is pretty much applies to almost any kind of emotion magic, where they can either use it on themselves, or they can use it on other objects or people. And what he's able to do is it gives him the abilities of telepathy and sensory manipulation. And so he can make people see, hear, smell, feel, taste whatever he wants them to feel. Um, and the book's title is The Voice of a Mute. And the reason it's called The Voice of a Mute is because the main character, he's a mute, but in gaining this power of boredom, he gains kind of a magic voice, being able to use telepathy or sensory manipulation on people to be able to actually talk to them now, instead of having to like use sign language or anything.
Whoa.
And so that's where the title comes from, is his magic power giving him a voice. This poor mute kid now has a voice. And so yeah, it can also be a rather scary power, because when it comes to sensory manipulation, you can you can fry someone's brain by overloading their sensory inputs. It's not a pleasant experience.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's actually incredibly interesting.
thank you. I'm quite proud of everything that I've managed to do with this.
That actually makes me want to read it. That is very interesting. Wow. Could you describe maybe another example of emotional magic?
Yeah. Ooh. Okay. So I'll do one of the bad guys. Oh, which one do I do though? Okay, I'll do the less spoilery bad guy. Um, one of the villains, his emotion magic is rage, and rage is gives someone the ability of full elemental control, and so essentially he can control Earth. If you've ever watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, it's like being the Avatar.
A little
You
bit.
can you can control all the elements, and so they can be particularly scary because they can just wreak havoc on like everything. So that's another example. And there's um there's like a whole bunch of different things. Like, some of them can, like, well, this one can shoot lightning, or this one can shoot fire and control fire. This one can control water, and this one can like shrink or grow their body in size, and this one can fly, and this one can create light. And so there's a lot of different, it's kind of like superpowers in a way for a lot of them.
I've had the thought, I've actually had the thought that magic is actually emotional.
Hmm.
Well, maybe this is why it's so interesting to me. I've had this thought that like people who can manipulate emotions are in some sense doing magic. So like a concrete example of this would be like if somebody can manipulate their emotions into thinking that they're really confident, then they go into a room and even if they don't actually have competence, even if they shouldn't be confident because they actually aren't the superior mind in that room, if they can if they can sort of will into being that they are confident, then people will think, oh, they're confident, and then they've sort of created this magical realm, and that would be the white side of it. And then the dark side of it would be like somebody could like deeply believe that somebody else has a problem. And then everything they do, even if it seems really nice, like let's say somebody believes that another person is like deeply messed up, right? So this person is doing like black magic, believes the other person is like deeply messed up. And then everything they say, which is like nice and like all loving, and everything they do is still interpreted as the person thinking, well, this person thinks I'm like, there must be something really wrong about me because this person's super like acting super loving, but the deeper part of their psychology, which is that they really have a negative perspective of what this person is like bleeding through. And so that you could do magic where you could like kind of hurt people emotionally by sort of doing these things. I've had this thought. I wonder if 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 you've conceptualized similar things or if that's a completely new theory.
I guess that's kind of, well, I'm not necessarily unfamiliar with that kind of idea. Like, like psychopaths, they'll capitalize on other people's empathy. And so like emotion can, not only is it a superpower for yourself and like in how you're trying to handle yourself with confidence, but it can also, yeah, there is that aspect where you can manipulate others' emotions. Psychopaths know how to get other people to be empathic towards them. Um, there's examples of like people who are like killers, and they'll be like crying crocodile tears in court and whatnot, and like maybe the story gets spread around, and maybe there's like all these people are like, oh, but look at them crying, and they're so handsome. How could they have done all these terrible things? You should let them go free and stuff like that. And so people do things like that. So it's, yeah, there definitely is kind of that magic-like quality to what emotion can do for us. And I mean, even anxiety is feels so, and this is something that I've experienced even recently. Like I in the last few months, I started having some panic attacks. I don't have them anymore, thankfully, but um, it was the first time ever that I'd ever experienced what a panic attack is, and it's genuinely like magic because it completely like overrides
Mm-hmm.
your conscious mind, and it makes you think things that you're like the intelligent part of you knows is complete nonsense. And so yeah, it can be just very very magical in that sense where it's like it doesn't make sense, but that's what's happening.
Yeah, in some sense, the logic, like you're saying, disappears. The analytical mind disappears when you have this sort of overwhelming emotion. I've had panic attacks where where I was perplexed because I was like, logically, I should be completely fine. Like I'm reasoning through it. There's no problem. Yet
Hmm.
I'm feeling this like tremendous amount of anxiety.
Yeah, it's like this complete impending sense of doom, and you're just like sitting in a living room.
Hmm.
Yeah, genuinely, it's not. It's one of those things that's just like doesn't make sense, but it, for whatever reason, it's part of being human, and there is a you do have to learn how to manage that. You have to learn like where's this coming from, and how do I teach myself to not come back to this place.
Ha what do you think about Jungian psychology, like shadow integration? Are you familiar with this?
Somewhat familiar, yeah. I've actually got a couple of Jung's books, but I have yet to read through them all the way. Um, but yeah, shadow work is something I do have a fair bit of interest in, and yeah, because you need to learn how to take what is, because that's like the whole like taming the monster within, right?
Well, not even taming. So, like, I'm bringing it up in this exact case because my experience with sort of tremendous anxiety, just sort of these like really magical levels of just like negative emotions, is that what I did with it was that I integrated it. So, I had this experience, and while I was having it, um, instead of figuring out how to get rid of it, well, basically, the first thing I did was like I accepted it. Like, so there was this
Yeah.
tremendous amount of impending doom, and I accepted. I'm like, I'm accepting that I have this feeling. I'm accepting that my worst fears could come true, and then sort of like in accepting it, I was able to sort of see through it in a way. So I didn't repel it. I was able to like cut through it to some degree.
Yeah. So that what comes to mind in that is it's kind of a in saying that you're able to see through it. It sounds I've got like things that I know that Vervaeke has said just kind of popping up in my head. That whole the whole the the
Right.
through the device through which you see, and when you focus, because like if you focus on it, then it you end up seeing you see it, but you're not seeing through it. And so it does seem like the integration of it is you're you're seeing through it. You're not seeing it, you're seeing through it. And that helps you be able to like, yeah, be able to move past
Yeah.
it.
The way you described that was so perfect. It was actually the inverse. You described it both ways. You described seeing through it and seeing it, and then seeing. You described it both ways, but you're seeing through it. So like when it's bad, you're seeing through the anxiety, and then as you like just sort of like observe, you start seeing the anxiety itself, and that's where it becomes sort of like you start seeing it as something maybe separate from you, or something which is you're seeing your shadow or something.
Mm. Yeah, it's um, hmm. There's a comic that I once saw where in dealing with your fear, it's like if you're running from your fear, it's gonna get bigger. But if you actually if you turn towards it, you face it, and you're able to accept it. That okay, I'm afraid. Let that be in me, um, and it gets lesser. And yeah, that's a very, I would think, a crucial step to being able to allow negative emotions like anxiety to be able to come and go gracefully.
Yeah, I get the feeling like you are like a true artist in some deep sense, because you are sort of touching on these very deep levels of psychology. Because I think this is sort of similar, maybe you haven't read Jung, but this is similar to where Jung went, where I think he described in his red book that he sort of like allowed the contents of his unconscious to sort of come forth. It feels like you maybe have i- in in the artistic process of sort of like dealing with the muse in some degree, like in writing expressively, where you're, because it almost seems like your writing process is a meditation on, you could say the Jungian psychologist would say a meditation on your unconscious, but another way to think about it would be a meditation on the collective unconscious, or just different things which are, it's you're describing elements that are coming forth, so it's something which is deeper than the Freudian ego.
Yeah, I agree with that because I feel there are a lot of times when I am writing where I feel like things are coming out that weren't necessarily part of my that came out of my conscious, maybe even my subconscious. They it did come maybe more out of like a collective unconscious. And I feel like when it comes to storytelling, I mean, so much within storytelling as a practice, the collective unconscious is kind of I would imagine it's one of the primary constructors to good storytelling. So yeah, I feel like I tap into that a lot, not consciously. I don't know how, I don't necessarily know how you would do that consciously, but and I think that's kind of the point. So it's yeah.
Now you were describing like that you had sort of written things and then later noticed that there was sort of this archetypal deep significance. You realized that it was the stuff that Jordan Peterson was talking about. I'm curious what, like, if you'd have an example of that. The other thing I'm thinking is that, like, I notice, I don't know if you've ever seen Game of Thrones, but in Game of Thrones, the feeling I got when I watched it is that every single character in it is just a archetype. It's just like a full-on archetype. Like one character is just the archetype of like truth and honesty, and the other character is the archetype of just pure cunning evil. It's just like they're not even, to some degree they don't even have character traits. They're just pure archetypes where you can see what they're doing. But then seeing these archetypes like clash with each other, it's really, really, really interesting.
Mm. Yeah, I haven't actually watched it. But I yeah, I can understand that. As for an example, uh, the main thing that comes to my mind um, was this is a story that I don't have it finished, but um, I had many years ago I started writing the kind of the origin story of the mythos behind the book that I do have published. And so it's about Heaven and his friends and their fight against hell and what happened with them. Like what's the true story behind them. And when I had already written a fair bit for it when I started listening to Peterson. And after I started listening to him, I went back and like was reading in it. And because of the nature of that kind of story, it's a very mythological kind of story because it's basically about these divine characters. There's something like way larger than life about them, and there's kind of a the creation of the world in it, and this, very strong theme of the eternal battle between heaven and hell. Because that was the primary idea behind this story. Is I want to take heaven and hell, embody them in characters, and have them clash. And how do they clash? And what is this story of theirs? And when I started rereading it after discovering Peterson and having him talking all about, you know, heaven and hell and mythology and good and evil, from all these psychological standpoints, I was then reading my story and going, "Oh, I this is right here. This is Peterson talking about this particular thing, and I somehow knew about it and was embodying it in these characters in this particular scene here or there." I don't know that I could think of like an exact
Hmm.
um, point in that story that it made me think that. I might have to go back and reread it some more. I'm trying to rewrite it at the moment because the initial iteration of it, I liked it, but I was writing it at a point in time where my technical skill at writing was not as good as it is now. So it needs to be rewritten.
I have so many directions I want to go. One of them is to sort of go into what exactly the heaven and hell archetypes are, and the other one is the technical side of writing. Like, do you have? I've been studying music sort of deeply, and I played music for like a really, really long time, and I would sort of sit down. I would improvise. I would do these things, but I would improvise and make music. I sort of compose music on the fly, and I would also learn music.
Mm.
And it wasn't until sort of more recently that I started like breaking down the music that I was learning, like because I was trying to like get better at creating music. I'm like, well, how do these people actually do it? Like, how do actual artists do it? And I started trying to isolate the process of understanding, well, how do you analyze music? Like, like you can when people listen to music, they have a feeling. And lots of artists, I think, stay on that element of like feeling, but there's also an analytical way that you can go into it. And so, like, very, very um
It can become really, really mathematical.
it can become there's yeah, I mean, so like I'll give you like my entire summary to parse out that mathematical versus uh artistic side of it. It feels like in music, there are sort of there's a way to analyze it, and the best way to analyze it probably is in understanding the beat structure. So in understanding a melody, even we'll understand which parts of it are lining up in beats because you have a melody. They're oftentimes they feel melodic, but they're also like a higher dimensional structure of a beat thing. So like a melody can be a 16 bar thing. So that means that it has two bars which are kind of you know in relationship to each other, and then those two bars are in relationship to another two bars, and that's four bars where there's like an internal structure, and so it's like fractal, where like at each level in the melody you're building out this fractal thing, and then there's also the theoretical element where you're understanding, okay, well, how do those play into the chords, the key signature, the different the tonic and their dominance, for example. And so there's that way of like feeling music, but there's also a way um of being able to see it in a more interesting way.
Yeah, that that makes me go, well, can that analytical part be applied to jazz?
That's a good question.
Yeah, because jazz is all over the place.
I think it can be. I think it can be. So I don't know jazz as well. I've
Yeah,
analyzed it a bit. I would say that one part of that can really be applied to jazz is the beat of it, because the jazz chords can be crazy, but oftentimes they exist within a
yeah,
beat, which is like
yeah,
really, really pulsing.
yeah. I think, yeah, that sounds right. That they would. be they'd adhere more to a beat maybe than a
Yeah,
melody.
well, I think maybe a point that you're getting at, which is maybe very salient, is like, um, is that music can exist potentially without like much structure or any structure at all, because like contemporary music, um, for example, it exists where I'm just looking for something here. It exists where like there's barely any structure at all. So like on Peterson Academy, Samuel Andreev, I don't know if you've listened to his music at all, but it's like really, really unstructured, even more than jazz. Um, but this is what I would say to that. I would say, okay, that's true. Maybe let's take that music can be entirely unstructured, but understanding when that's happening and when that's not happening is important because it's a different thing when music is very structured. When it's like Bach, when it's like really fractal and like baroque in the way it's written, understanding what that is still important, even if in some cases it can be entirely unstructured.
Yeah, yeah, and well, like you mentioned Bach, and I would almost say that a lot of his music is you can almost understand some music like that in a more narrative sense, because music does do that. It can be
Hmm.
like a narrative. There's like the an up and down flow to it, and that's I mean that's really what narratives and stories are. There's there's upward flow, downward flow, and when I say flow, that's like in the way that I was taught. I took theater and film in school, so I learned about certain storytelling structure. And in that, there's you've got like your beginning, which is kind of laying out the world, but then you've got your rising action, and then you've got a climax point, and then there's a fall, and then there's a conclusion. And music does things in a very it can do things in a very similar way to that.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if you could maybe speak to this precise definition in writing, because there's something in music I feel where often a motif is presented immediately. It's presented immediately and then it's built on. And then maybe the next thing you do is you like invert on it. And then a sonata, I guess, is defined as sort of providing like an alternate theme, but I think really it's not that alternate. So you never like my sister was learning a Debussy piece where she was playing the piece. She picked it because her um teacher was like, "Oh, pick a piece." And so she just picked it. She didn't necessarily listen to the whole thing. And when she started learning it, she realized that in the piece of music, it was going along and then suddenly the character just changed dramatically. And that was very distasteful. And that rarely happens in music because it feels like in music there's something and it's being built on and there's a cohesion. Jordan Peterson describes it like a lotus flower opening up. It's something unfolding. Do you
Yeah.
have do you experience that in writing where it's like the DNA of the entire work exists in the first, little bit?
I think so. I believe I could say something like that when it comes to writing, because of the way there's different ways in which people will write, and some people are more what they call pantster, which is writing by the seat of your pants, and then there's more plotters who are planning things out. They've got their checklists and everything, and all of their plot points and all of their emotional beats, and so they the plotters will construct a story kind of more similarly to maybe how someone would compose a music piece. Um, whereas I'm more of a pantser, so I like calling it exploratory writer or a discovery writer. I'm figuring it out as I go, and I do experience that where I try to start out with just the characters. Like I just have to start with okay, who's the character, who's like the main character, what are their relationships with the other cursory characters that and like the world that they're in, what's their relationship with the world like, and what do they want, and what comes up to bring them out into the world to start maybe attaining what they want. And there are there are I have had plenty of points in time where I'll be writing and I get to a point where I feel stuck, like writer's block or something, and the lotus stops unfolding, and
Mm.
I'm just like, well, okay, what's happening? There's something wrong. If I'm not liking where it's going, and then I feel stuck. I get stuck, and I am able to consciously recognize there's something wrong. Something needs to be done here that gets the story back on track, that gets that lotus coming out again. And very often, what I find is that conflict is needed because the characters are getting maybe a little too stagnant in their current position. And so something needs to just come in and blow things open a little bit and get it tends to get the ball rolling.
That is really interesting. I'm what you're saying there, I can see how that maps onto music as well, where I wonder if that is what artists do a lot. They have a motif, they play it out, and then once the motif is kind of finished opening up, that's what the sonata form is when they add like the second movement. It's like a conflict. It's like here's a conflicting motif representing that. I think that there's different forms where sometimes they don't like there's a variation form where it's just like you have a variation on a theme and you just keep playing that variation out. There's different forms, but I think that idea hits across domains.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And like you can even like with with that motif idea, like you can iterate on a single motif in so many different ways. And I mean, when it comes to storytelling, I mean, storytelling is basically doing that because so many stories have like the exact same tropes. That's why, all these different storytelling tropes exist. People are telling something, they're telling kind of the same thing, but then they're doing maybe something a little bit different here and there.
my feeling is that that happens when people are essentially not doing what you do, because I think that writers, w- there's a selling out motif.
Mm,
Um a sort of a selling of your soul, which I think is where you go, okay, I'm not going to be authentic, I'm not going to do something which actually connects with me, but I'm going to do something which that I know works because I've seen it work, so I'm just going to
yeah,
copy this thing.
that's writing for the audience. Yeah, I would say that you're trying to write towards an audience. And yeah, that can work and you can sell books like that. I'm less interested in selling the books as I am just writing the kind of stories that I want to read because that's one of my primary motivations is like I there's lots of books out there and I've read not nearly as many as I'd like to. But I still don't know I still haven't found the story that like really speaks to me and this is the story that I really want to read. And so that's part of why I do it is like I'm trying to create something that I enjoy the most.
That's really interesting. That's kind of how I feel with piano to some degree. I feel like I have these ideas that I've never heard and I want to exist. I think it was Beethoven who said something like the reason he lives is because he has all this stuff to share. I forget the exact quote. It was kind of profound. I gotta look that up.
Yeah, because I think there is always for creative people particular there's always something like within them that is kind of fighting to get out. And creative people have to be creative. They have to have that outlet. And Peterson has talked about this a number of times, I know, where he says creative people have to be creative or they just die.
Right.
And I find that very true. I'm grateful I have a lot of different creative outlets, and um, writing's just the one I've found I have the most patience with. And it also, I think it's really helpful that with writing, there's a very immediate result. There's both an immediate result in like you write something and bam, you have what you have written, and so you can sit there and you can look at it and maybe be like, oh well, this part actually wasn't that great. Let me fix this little thing real quick.
Hmm.
And so there's sort of an aspect of immediate gratification to the process of writing, but then it's also a practice of patience, and that it takes a very long time to write out a completed story, especially one that's like a normal book length. Like I said, it took me 7 years, but then I ended up getting most of it done in about 1 or 2 years when I finally gave myself a small enough goal to pursue every day. Procrastinated on it for so long, but then I was like, all right, 100 words a day, and then I was able to do it.
Here's something I'm wondering. What do you think about this? So, there's kind of two models that I'm thinking about. So, writing, I feel like any art form, I think even music, as abstract as it is, I think that the reason why people want to listen to it is because there's some exchange of information. There's some information that is going from the artist to the audience. Um, and well, one way you can look at it is that the writer is maybe sort of climbing up a hill of novelty, or they're climbing up a hill of significance, or something. And as they're moving up, they are then conveying what they learned with people maybe down here. They're sort of showing people this thing. And then at every stage along the way, you can be doing this. The other model I'm thinking of is like, well, what if instead of doing that, instead of sort of climbing up the thing, what if you're somebody who is like, has this sort of incredibly top down perspective where you just see, you're not like on the hill climbing, you're at the very top of the hill, and you're just like seeing everything, and you're conveying information from that like place. And the reason I'm presenting it like this, because what I'm wondering is this: I'm wondering if you get better by learning more about writing, learning more about archetypes, learning more about significance, because you move to that top place of being able to share more important things, or if it doesn't matter because you're on a hill climbing and you're always conveying information down. Which model do you think is more correct? Like that learning, that you can sort of like learn more things, or that at every stage along the way you're still progressing, so it's still something is happening.
Yeah, I think it is some more that you're always progressing. I'm not certain that high point from which someone looks down at really exists unless you're God. And so I do think it's the hill, and it's the whole kind of Sisyphus thing. You can get up the hill, and maybe you think you've reached the top. And this is kind of where the Dunning-Kruger effect can come in. You learn a little bit, you think you've reached the top. Maybe you learn just a tiny bit more, and you realize you're still at the bottom of something. You got to keep climbing again. And so, yeah, I think it does go more along that kind of model, because I, for as much as I've written and as much as I feel like I've learned, and I've been largely self-taught when it comes to writing and storytelling, and part of part of the learning process for me has really just been paying attention to other stories, like how are other stories told, and what are, like, how does the structure of them work, how do the characters work, and you can learn that. You don't even have to read books exactly to learn that sort of thing. You can get that from movies and TV shows, and anything that is a story. um
Which stories do you find the most compelling?
oh oh man. Probably ones that, are you asking like in terms of like theme and like what they are about?
Hmm. I think in musical terms, so many times in music, what I would define as compelling is music that like moves me in some way, moves me emotionally, moves me, makes me actually want to physically move, or like
Okay, yeah.
moves me. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that helps. Yes. What I have found that has moved me the most in stories is relationships between characters. And I I like to think of plot as the thing that helps move character relationships along in changing and developing. So like the plot serves the characters rather than characters serving the plot, because some stories are the characters serve the plot and they're just trying to tell the sequence of events. And I find those kind of stories, they can be fun, but they're a little less interesting. They're kind of I'm trying to think of an example. um I'm not sure if like maybe Avengers might be a good example, but they Avengers does lean maybe a little more towards the plot. They do have certain character moments and character relationships, and but I don't know that you would say that that's like the heart of what the Marvel stories are. um I mean, maybe someone would disagree with me there, but that I would say that they probably are less on the character relationships and development side of things. um and so the stories that tend to move me more are more like um ones that have heavy emphases on family are one thing. Like, have you ever seen About Time?
No.
Okay. About Time is it's a kind of a romance comedy movie, and with a little bit of a drama. And the core of that movie is two different relationships. There's the relationship between the main character and the girl, and then the main character and his father. And so it's those two relationships that are the emotional core of the movie. And when the emotional core of something is rooted in characters and their relationships with one another, that those are the kind of stories that I think move me the most.
What kind of that's to some extent that feels really, really um primitive in the sense of being deep, like a very, very core structure of reality. Because like I think Vervaeke presents the idea that I remember that it was in his sort of new I think it was in New Testament sort of conversation. They had this round table, they were doing these conversations where he talked about everything in reality being relational, that there is nothing which is non-relational. And the relationship between two characters is kind of the ultimate of that, because a character is able to embody so much traits that you're able to, because this is in music certainly what happens is you have ideas, and those ideas are in relation to another idea. There's no music without relationship. It's all relational. Everything
Yeah,
is,
each note is related to one another. Yeah.
each note is related to one another, and it's related to like other in like higher dimensional space, where this note is related to this note over here because it's repeating, it's part of the same theme. And and there's so much of that multi-dimensional relationship stuff happening. What's what kind of relationships, what do you like to see in relationship things? Do you like to, when you're seeing like a relationship story unfold, do you like to see how certain character traits like play out, like unfold? Or
Yeah. And I think probably my number one would be the relationship of a father with their child. Um, those kind of stories have always impacted me the most, I would say. And um, let's see, I'm trying to think of some good examples for that. Um, so I mean, there's a lot of them. Like even like The Last of Us, the TV series or the video game, has a very kind of father-daughter kind of dynamic in the main characters, and those are always very compelling. Um,
now,
and really largely with like fathers and how they and their relationships. um I think I like those a lot, in part because I want to become one, and also in part because it feels so rare actually, because fathers have become largely in media these days. They've kind of been brushed off to the side, and they're always like the dumb husband kind of character. And so whenever I see fathers being depicted as like very fatherly in a like a godlike kind of way, where they know how to express compassion for their loved ones, and they emanate like protection and competence and and kind of like safety almost. That's one of my favorite things to see depicted, because I feel like it's quite rare.
That maybe could be described as like society society in some sense being skewed some way, like there's a deficit in society, if like if those, because you are correct that like, with many of the stories that are told these days, the father character is really absent. And maybe part of that is because it's viewed that where you come from isn't as important as society and where that leads you. So a child is raised in their home, and people view it like, forget about your parents and stuff like that. What's important is the modern ideas that you should adopt, and maybe that's where
Yeah,
that mostly comes from.
it's like there's strength within yourself, and you can go out into the world and you can just take what you want, maybe sort of thing. And it's not so much as of wisdom passed down from the elders. There's an absence of that.
Right. So that is like a mirror of what's happening maybe in philosophy, except for Jordan Peterson, where the postmodern movement is this feeling of like, well, there's nothing to learn from anything in the past because it's all power games essentially, which is an interesting critique. But yeah, there's yeah, that missing element.
Yeah, and I don't I like for me, I don't quite understand why like power games are so focused on. I really don't understand that. And maybe it's just because I have so little interest in power myself.
Hmm.
But it's like the world doesn't the world doesn't revolve around power, as much as some people might really strongly try to argue that. And I think there is a somewhat strong argument for that, but I I think the world operates more on relationships and stories than it does on power.
Yeah. I mean, I'll present like why I think it is there's something valid to it, which is this. So like the academic who goes powers kind of completely pointless will go, okay, like you learn information, right? You can learn information, and the information has the power in it. Like you learn true things, and if you learn enough true things, you get smart enough, you get a higher position in society. But this is what the counter would be to that. And I think it's actually a legitimate counter, is that okay, but in order to even get to that place where you can learn new things, you need to have something to start with. Like you think about a kid who had sort of terrible um upbringing, they don't have any money, they have nothing. They can't even get to that place where they can learn information. And so that's a description of power, because that kid at the very, very low location who it's if they had the right information, if they knew how to look at it, because like I know when I heard Jordan Peterson's models, it was suddenly like, boom, a world opened up to me because I had all these tools to work with, all these intellectual tools. I had a way of viewing the world which was so much more significant. So you could say that that information in itself is in a position of power, because having access to it, knowing where to go, like knowing what the map is. I think it's why Jordan Peterson called his thing maps of meaning. It's like, here's a map that actually works. Um, Being able to even, because once you have the map, it's like, well, everything is not power, but until you have that map, you could argue that it's power based to some degree.
Hmm.
I don't know. I'm just I throw those ideas out there because I'm trying to some degree it's a relational thing because to some degree I see these two different sides and I see this very often, two different parties which are really not communicating with each other. And I go like, well, what can this one understand about this one so that they can actually communicate? Because I think that the maybe an archetypal example of this would be the old generation and the new generation. It's like the old generation sort of sees the new generation and they're like, "You're crazy," and the new generation sees the old generation and they're like, "You're all stuck up," and it's because they're not like conveying information. They're not like able to see the other side. So that's why I I want to like play devil's advocate, sort of to unpack that.
Yeah. Well, what that what I what I'm kind of taking from that is this whole idea of power is it's relationally based still.
It is.
And so there was a I remember hearing just recently, someone was talking about, I think it was like from a podcast I was listening to. Um, they were talking about Game of Thrones, which I haven't watched, but they're talking about this one particular scene where like one character was saying that knowledge is power, and then there's another character there, and she goes, "Guard slit his throat," and so they bring a knife to the guy's throat, and then
Yep.
she tells him to back off and back off some more and whatever, and she tells him power is power. And as a storyteller, my immediate inclination was to be like, I want to write a narrative comeback to that because I think that's actually because I disagree with it because I want to now like, all right, let's recreate that scene, and the guy who says knowledge is power, let's say that same kind of scenario starts happening, and but he's got some kind of he knows that maybe the guards are really actually on his side. So she says for the guards to slit his throat. So they come up to him, and then he just tells them, don't do that. And then they actually obey him instead. And it throws around like she didn't know, but he did. And so I think you can turn
Mm.
that, you can turn it on its head like that. Because knowledge is power in many ways. And that would be the example to show that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I see what you mean.
Yeah. So it seems like there's a lot of different expressions of power, but it does seem to come down to the relationships that you have. And for gaining the the transaction or um the transaction of the wisdom of the elders passing down to the younger generations, it's like there has to be a relationship there. They're the only reason they're like butting heads, like, oh, each side's crazy or whatever, it's because they lack a relationship. They're not actually talking to each other. They're talking past one another, and they're not relating to one another. And so that's certainly a big problem that needs to be needs both sides to want to solve to be able to solve it.
Now, so problem solving. So like this is something where writing is incredibly useful because you give information, you sort of play this out. But st- I've sort of posed this question to other people um before, which is that it seems like to some degree the there a large set of problems are solved because we have many great um I'm thinking specifically of Jordan Peterson. Basically, Jordan Peterson presented these ways of looking at the world which facing your fears, these very basic understandings that before people would end up in sort of eternal cycles of running away from the things they're afraid of, and then they okay, well, that problem is solved. um with what problems do you think there are, and like what solutions can you move towards generally, and that can be expressed in writing, or is that existing in sort of more of an ethereal space where you're kind of feeling into that space?
Well, I know there's a lot of people who would. Okay, so well, when it comes to writing, you've got fiction and then you've got nonfiction, and so you can. There's plenty of people who are approaching problems in nonfiction. Um, brilliant people, even like Peterson himself, writing books and tackling ideas and problems and really getting into the nitty gritty of the details for them. And so that's certainly one approach. And I think it's a really good approach. It's a very necessary approach because we need to understand what the problem is in detail, and we need to understand ways that we can approach it in detail. Narrative approaches problems in a very different kind of way. And sometimes narratives, I mean, aren't even trying to really address a problem. Sometimes they're just trying to entertain people. Um, and so if I were to say something about like narrative problem solving, you have to it kind of does come from a somewhat ethereal place, but you're trying to, similarly to the nonfiction approach, you are trying to represent the problem, perhaps not so much in its fullness, but in its practicality. You're trying to show the readers its like very visible effects. And then you're trying to figure out a way to also visibly address those effects. And so um, Dostoevsky did this really well through his embodying the problems and their kind of solutions in his characters, like in the brothers Karamazov. Each character does have it's kind of like you were talking about with Game of Thrones having each character is like its own particular archetype. The brothers Karamazov has a very similar thing kind of going to it. And so like there's Ivan and his very intellectual atheist thing. And so he presents a very particular problem. And in his story, he writes out how where that leads for Ivan. And the answer to it that is the winner is Alyosha, and who's the believer and who's maybe had some struggles with his faith, but has ultimately remained faithful. And he's kind of like the only sane person at the end of the book.
Wow, that's very, very interesting to me. Okay, so the purpose of a writing is to is to show the problem in its practicality. Now, I'm thinking here specifically why that would be useful. Um so why would it not be more useful to just outline it exactly? And one, like in a sort of theological, clearly non-fictional form as opposed to writing it out. And one possible reason for that I could think of would be that you can't necessarily perceive the problem if it's in theology because you don't have the motivation to like look at it. You go like somebody's writing about nihilism and you go like, okay, like I don't care, like I don't like the ultimate reality, like I'm not in that place. But if you like write a story and you show that like, oh, this is how it actually plays out in life, it's like a map that allows you to direct your attention to what is significant. You see like, oh, in these characters that like characters, you can see how this is actually important.
Yeah. Um, oh man, my brain is drawing a blank on this one.
I I've thought about like, well, this is an idea I have. This is an
Hmm.
idea I have that there's an esoteric understanding because it's never really verbalized. There's an understanding that there's sort of two critical elements to anything. There is the information, and then there's the motivation. Because it's like the information. This is kind of the idea I was expressing before. The information is like it's everything you need. It's all there. But if you don't have the motivation to look at it, like it doesn't matter that you have the information. Like if you pick up a book, you have the book that has all the answers to your life, but you just can't find the motivation. Motivation being like, well, why would you do that?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So that is one of the advantages that fiction has, in that it has the capacity to make you care about a character that's not real. And in doing so, that can help guide you through the map that is that character. Because, uh, you know, oh man, um, you can make a character likable. Like there's almost there's like a formulaic way to make a character likable and to make the reader interested in them and empathize with them and want to see them accomplish their goals. And so narrative has that advantage where you can get someone interested through those
Mm.
sort of methods. And that is that's a significant advantage because then you can take them anywhere. If the reader's interested in a character, they're in. You can take them anywhere. So that would be how I'd say. Because if you're interested in just laying out the information, it's it feels kind of it feels relationally disconnected. There's not as much yeah, it doesn't it's not something that quite drives people in motivation to engage with it because it's not it it's disembodied. Disembodied information is really, really hard to engage with.
Mm-hmm. I feel like we have a similar kind of ability to be heavily in abstract space. Because I noticed this like where because this is the other benefit of writing is that it allows you to sort of pull things that you can't quite imagine into reality. Um, but isn't that like a risky thing to do if you write like that? Like if you don't have because this is maybe you're doing a bit of both, but the writing, which is very exciting and interesting, is this kind of thing where you have you don't necessarily you don't know you know yourself if it's like what it is, but you're just like playing with these ideas that are like out of your range. Um, but like when you do that, you can't really like you can't you can't dictate what happens because you don't know like oh this is important. You're like this feels important. Um, like this is what I feel like happened. Jordan Peterson describes this with like mythology, where mythology played out um in this in as sort of the proto of religious concepts where people would sort of just tell stories and they told stories basically probably just because they were like interesting. They told stories about Zeus and what they did, and then these stories became like hyper interesting, and like the stories that like won the stories that won were they were like touching on something really really important, but like if you're but they had to be exploratory, so like they were exploring with these ideas, but the people at the time, like did they know themselves what was important, or like was it just a death process where like everybody kind of told a story and like then some people happened to tell the right story because they were exploring the right direction, but like how safe is that terrain?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that I quite have an answer to it. And I my assumption would be that it can be it can be really important in trying to I mean, okay. Well, okay. Let me ask you this. What would you say what do you think the danger would be? Like what would the danger lead to in that practice?
Well, I think that the danger could lead to, so let's say you're somebody who is very, very authentic and you're just exploring stuff. I could hypothesize that the danger would lead to you building out like a like exploring correct terrain, but then you don't benefit from it almost. Like you sort of like lay the groundwork by like exploring, but then never are your ideas picked up on. It's your children who kind of followed that path. I don't know, this is incredibly abstract. I'm not sure if what I'm saying is like reading.
So it sounds kind of like you're you're describing like a process of you're of sowing something, but you don't actually get to
Right,
reap anything in the end. And so
right.
like it would be like a like for oneself kind of like maybe a futile process. Like there's a danger of like you're just wasting your time.
Right.
Um and I yeah, that could be a very real thing. But I mean my argument against that would be for you don't know what benefit that could have later down the line. Maybe it won't be for you, but why should that be a reason for you to stop you're really interested in if you're really interested in truth and you're trying to explore explore reality through stories and writing and everything like that, then maybe you're not going to come to conclusions that are all that useful for you, but maybe they're useful for someone, and that's got to be worth doing it.
I completely agree. I completely agree. I think that is the correct answer. Um, the I jump around so much. I'm just very fascinated by this. So the archetypes of the heaven and the hell. Describe the hell archetype because I feel like I have. Okay, yeah, yeah. Because I think there's two conceptions of evil.
Hmm.
There's a conception of evil which is the absence of something, and then there's a conception of evil which is almost like this motivating factor. So like, um, evolutionarily, you could say that lions were an evil to many species, but lions also um hyper motivated different species to adapt, very, very strongly. And people make this argument about like about money. They'll say like, well, I don't want to give this person money because they lose their motivation. And so and that's like an evil. It's like you're taking away something good. And so there's like two conceptions of evil. There's like this sort of non-existence, and then there's like this sort of, so like, uh, it,
Yeah. Okay. This is okay. This is something I can talk about maybe a little bit. So with hell, uh, as conceived in the stories that I have, he is, oh man, I'm not sure where to start. Um, I'll start at the beginning. His purpose within kind of like existence itself, as it is in the story, he is trying to escape existence in a very literal sense because he doesn't believe that he along with heaven are supposed to even be there because initially um in their conception they were kind of in this kind of a limbo state where they're they're basically watching over the concepts, like the very concepts of non-existence and existence. And heaven is the one who's watching over existence, hell is the one watching over non-existence. And the two existence is trying to get inside non-existence because, well, it's just its very nature. Existence wants to exist and it wants to get rid of non-existence. And so heaven is trying to essentially get existence into non-existence. Hell is trying to stop them. They end up fighting, and both of them end up falling into existence itself. And from there, hell's whole motivation is, we don't belong here. We gotta I'm try to get out of here. Heaven doesn't want to do that. He likes it there. He starts kind of creating the world, and hell just absolutely hates it. He wants to wipe it away. He doesn't want any of this to exist. He doesn't think any of it belongs there. And so that's kind of his evil. It is kind of more of that non-existence kind of thing. The absence of something, but he he has to strive. He's having to like trying to strive towards things not existing. And one of the primary things that he does is he's trying to corrupt the world in such a way that even heaven himself can't stand being there anymore, and will try to help hell figure out a way to get them out of existence. So that's the basis of evil that hell resides within.
That seems like a very, very archetypal description. I've been reading some like myths, and it's not explicit. I've been reading Mircea Eliade's History of Religious Ideas, and it's not explicit in it, but like the myths that kind of play out, you have this kind of this this sort of evil element that like challenges the good, and exactly that happens is that eventually they clash, but existence is the result of that. Now, some you are describing concepts in like their most reduced form because follow me as I try to explain this. Um, it seems like as concepts like move up the level of abstraction, you end up with like things which are like more, they're like characters which like it's like he's kind of like this, but it's not one thing. So like you'll have a balance of something. You're like, well, it's good to have a balance between this and this. That feels like a higher order thing when you talk about balance. And then
Mm.
as you break down what the balance is, you end up in like, two distinct, and each thing is like unitary, where like what you're describing is like hell hell is trying to make things not exist. It's not like hell is like it doesn't like people. It's not like kind of like this kind of like abstract thing. It's like very, very, it's like the most clear way you could define anything. Non-existence is like the most primitive building block that you could possibly imagine. It's just existence and non-existence. Like that is the most primitive. Um, do you have a sense that truer things can be identified as having that more primitive structure like that?
Truer as in
Like this, like almost like a aesthetic way of viewing beauty. Like this is a sense that I have that if somebody describes something in like terms of like, oh, I feel like I have to have a balance between, my social life and my productive life, I think that's not the most reduced form. I think like, oh no, you should be reducing that into like, I need to have meaning. Like meaning is a reduced form where like, well, meaning fits both of those. Like meaning is like, well, whether it's social or it's not a balance thing. It's like that's a core thing. And so like I'm I'm
right, because you
that's
can have meaning in both social and productive. Okay.
yeah. Well, yeah. It's this is like the most abstract. Um I think I'm like, well, okay, so like what gets you to that place of going to like what got you to that place of viewing things in terms of this being non-existent and existent? Because I just view that as like the most deep possible.
Yeah, well, that that came out of um, kind of a philosophical question I was asking myself, which was more or less just, all right, well, how, like, if if God didn't exist, then what created everything? And what I came to is literally just the concepts themselves, existence, non-existence. It's like, all right, so in the beginning, there was no beginnings because nothing existed. But because non-existence existed, therefore the concept of existence existed. And these two conceptual abstract forces were duking it out until existence decided it needed like representatives, and that's where heaven and hell came in. And so that's really where that came from, is me just trying to figure out like, well, what's like a fun little philosophical, this is the explanation for everything kind of
Man, that's
thing.
so much sounds like ancient myths, like the way that they seem to uh have these ideas that like battled it out, like different traits. I wonder if I just had this thought. I wonder if in years to come, like, is this even possible? I don't know if this is impossible. If like fiction that people write now could become mythology of the future.
Yeah, that's certainly that's an interesting question. Yeah, it's like every like in 20,000 years, are people gonna be like, oh yeah, Gandalf was a demigod and we worship Gandalf?
Right. Or like, yeah, exactly. Gandalf is a really good example, or like I don't like Star Wars, like sort of the those archetypes sort of have this place in culture. Now, what would you say like do you have any perception of like how to get closer to those like those stories which would be so true that they would like resonate, or do you view it like an attempt to move in that direction is a break from authenticity, and then trying to find your way to it is not as effective as really just feeling it?
Yeah, because I do value being authentic in writing stories and in storytelling, and so it's that's a hard one. Um, hmm. I I think if I think if you're interested in it, and like if the story that you're trying to tell needs something like that, that will naturally come out. It but if you're going at it in such a way that like, oh, I'm going to very intentionally try to rationally, intellectually go at making a mythological story, you might it might be a bit of a fumble. As I really think when it comes to mythological stories, they they do they do feel more mythological when they come about in a more natural, exploratory kind of process. It's like you know, I'll say that when I'm writing, I really don't know what I'm doing. Like, I really don't. I I kind of understand the characters, and they are by and large the driving forces of the story. And sometimes when I get stuck, it's because for whatever reason the character's not communicating something to me. It's like I'm trying to understand the character and what are they going to do next, and they're not. It's not getting to me for whatever reason. And so yeah, so ultimately it's like I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of the uh it's like you can conceptualize a an author and their story as the puppet master and their puppets, but weirdly for me it feels kind of reversed. It feels like they're the puppet master and I'm the puppet, and I'm just having to go along
Oh,
with
wow.
what they're figuring out.
Wow, that's interesting. So
Yeah,
you
and
have
I think that is important for doing mythological like stories properly.
wow. Okay, so you have a relationship with your characters where it feels like not like you're controlling them, but like they are actually something that you're participating, you're interacting with, and they have sort of an autonomy.
Yeah, yeah, it does feel like that very often.
Do you despise some of your characters or do you sort of love them all?
Uh, I would say I lean towards I love them all, although there are, some of them are really terrible people, and but it's just kind of a weird thing. It's like like the character Hell. I really love writing for him. He is so much fun to write. He's absolutely diabolical, but every single time that he comes in, I'm just having so much fun. It's kind of a weird thing.
Hmm.
So yeah, I do kind of love him, and it's there can be some love-hate relationship with it because sometimes they're not going to tell me they don't tell me what is happening with them, and then I get stuck, and so I get mad at them.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Oh, that's cool. I feel like I'm actually getting a feeling of that. Yeah, so that feels like because I've heard people describe like being in touch with the muse is where there's a feeling of like something else is doing the process. And so even though that's not a rational thing, what you said about like sort of being upset with the character themselves for them not producing something, that in itself is like actually the maybe the proper way to write because you're not putting your own ego into it. The character, whatever that is, part of the collective unconscious or
because you're engaging with it in a very honest way. That's how I would say it. I'm not sure what I just said there, but
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, and not only honest, but like, well, I guess like what I mean by honest is you're engaging with it in an authentic way. You're you've got a relationship with the story that you're creating. It isn't so much it's not a top down forcing your will upon it sort of deal. Some writers might write like that. I don't think I would describe myself as someone who writes like that.
Are you ever upset with what happens or do you ever feel like okay, this is a bit meta, but do you ever feel like there's a move towards hell in like what your characters do? Like you have a character, it goes along and it hits like a dead end where you feel like now there was a move towards towards nothingness where something that you sort of thought was beautiful and unfolding then gets destroyed by some function of the characters.
I try to avoid that. If I feel like that's happening, in a sense that isn't good storytelling, I I
Right.
I I backtrack. And I've had that happen a number of times where like a particular scene that I'm writing is going in one particular direction, and I'm just like, no, this is wrong. And so I'll delete a whole bunch and I'll rewrite it in a different way and go a different direction. And then I'll be like, okay, this feels right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so yeah, I've had that happen.
Um, do you feel like you have to protect your characters from reality to some extent? So like that you have to mm, this is how I was with music for maybe my early development in music where I felt like when I was sort of creating things, I didn't want to share them with people because I felt like I would then suddenly lose touch with them. It would become part of their consciousness and mine, and it wasn't something that then it was like it was like, lost before it had matured.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't I mean my my instinctual response is like, no, you're not really that, you're not protective of your characters. No. Um,
Right.
and also in, you had also asked before, like if I ever got upset with something that I had my characters end up doing. Um, and also to more answer that, uh, I think sometimes I have, and it has stayed. And because it can be being upset by a thing happening can actually be a positive thing when it comes to writing a story, because maybe that's the right thing to do. Maybe you hate it, but there's a part of you that is also like, oh my gosh, this it works so well. It helps with like the theme of the story and the development of the characters, or whatever. And it's like, man, I'm really upset that this is happening, but it's right for the story. And I certainly get surprised by things. There are things that have, like when I was telling you earlier about the character who becomes an atheist and who was the one who stabbed the bad guy in the neck. I did not expect him to be the one who killed that guy. That was never in my plan at like any point in time of writing the book until it happened. And I was like, whoa, this this com like this is an integral, very important part of actually completing his arc. And so it worked perfectly. But I did not expect that happening at all. And I had other characters who would appear in the story all of a sudden that I never planned out. They only appeared like the moment I started writing them in spontaneously, like, okay, this character now exists. I had They were never a conceptual thing in my mind until it was just happening. And so I get surprised. And that's one of the reasons why I actually enjoy writing, because I kind of live for being surprised like that, because it makes it fun and it makes it unpredictable.
When you say surprise, is that like discovery of something? Because
Yeah.
it's a really interesting concept, sort of discovering things as you're playing with these characters. Because so it feels like the characters are something far deeper than just a construction of your psychology. Like they're they have the qualities. This is super interesting. So the characters that you write about, the way that you view them as sort of like people, like autonomous things. And I wonder if that then gives them that quality. And if writers that don't do that then don't have that quality with their characters, because I could imagine, I'm just hypothesizing, that if somebody views their character like a character, if they view it like more real, like they're like, oh, this is a character that I've given qualities and they're going to play out, then maybe that's how people see it. But if the person views it like this is a person and I have a relationship with the person, I'm not the person, I have a relationship with them, that feels like a very expansive understanding.
Yeah, and I'd be really interested in like, you'd have to like interview a lot of different writers and also have read their books and their characters, and that would be like something worth a study out. I would say is like how, like if you took like a certain population, had them read a certain selection of books, and then have them like rate how how much personhood that they felt the characters had, rather than just like it being a character, and then get with the authors of those books and question them and their process and their relationship with their own characters. That I'd be very interested in a study
Now,
like that. That would be really interesting to find out, because I don't know.
that would be interesting. Now, I'm wondering, like, sort of like the ways, because uh, like the characters that are described there, like these characters that are described, there's something about them where you almost don't want to reduce them. Like if I were to start asking you, like, okay, so your character, like how are you thinking up these ideas? To some extent, then you're losing touch with that, like that character part of it. Like if I start asking questions where the questions necessarily involve you having agency over them. The question is destructive in a way. So I'm wondering, like, with like the way that I'm approaching this, I feel like I'm approaching this like really distinct from like actually the proper way to write. Like my analytical mind of viewing this feels like it's not correctly synced up with the actual writing process, to where my questions and inquiries about it they're like valid questions maybe from a scientific point of view, but like not questions that actually help the writing process. Like,
Hmm.
so what I'm wondering is like, do you have, what is like the writing process? Like what, you
That's
know,
almost an analytical breakdown kind of question,
it
even
it
just
is.
that.
It is. And is it something which then is sort of illusory to being this sort of touched, because it, the moment you touch it, it loses its glimmer.
Yeah, and like what was funny to me is in like if you were to start asking me more analytical breakdown, like very specific details of like how do you do this, how do you do that? A lot of my answer to a lot of those kind of questions is I don't really know.
Right.
And it it is largely kind of just driven by just kind of an instinctual sense. And so it is something that's hard to break down. And so it's like, well, like, how do you how do you what's your writing process? How do you do it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, I sit down at my desk and I look at the screen, and you can break it down into these really boring kind of sounding steps, and then I press the J key on the keyboard and the O key and then the King. That really is it. That is like that's what I'm doing. I am sitting there typing on my keyboard, writing out the words, and
Mm-hmm.
in as I'm doing so, like I am seeing kind of like a lot of people will describe like they see a movie in their mind and then they write out what they see. And that for me, that is very much like what it's
Mm.
like. Like I see it in my head and I describe it as I guess best I can. That uh, is going to give in a way that I think is going to give the reader as close to the same picture that I'm seeing. And that can be hard. That can be pretty hard.
Mm-hmm. Um, well, we've went 2 hours. So I don't want to keep you too much longer, but because normally I like to do like, I'll go any length, but I'm just sort of acknowledging like
Yeah,
I would
yeah,
probably kind of want to keep going, but I'm also like, mm, yeah, like, just throwing that out there and
yeah.
sort of,
I'm doing good. So
all right, well, I'm good to keep going then.
yeah,
Um, so how does your analytical side play into the artistic thing? Because because you come from these two disparate, seemingly disparate places where you have the analytical and then you have the artistic, and your artistic process is in the form of like a true artist. And so does the engineering or um the other side of it come into play at all?
yeah. It does, and it doesn't come into play so much in the process of writing the story as it does in making sure that there's nothing wrong with the story, like in its internal
Oh,
consistency.
right, right,
It
right.
that's the part that is watching out for plot holes and anything that's like, well, maybe that doesn't make sense because of maybe this other thing. And so there is that analytical part that's really important because you have to that you're writing like when you're writing a story, you're creating something that has millions of details, and it can be very difficult to track that. And when you have a more analytical mind, I think that makes it a little bit easier to track those things, and they'll pop out at you and go like, okay, there's a problem here and there's a problem there. And so in that sense, it is still very integrated in that, and making sure that I'm not doing anything I'm not supposed to.
How well do you work out those problems? Because I can imagine there's probably edge cases where like something, you know, a character suddenly doing something which is maybe just like it didn't quite like it doesn't quite logically follow, but like it just adds so much. Do you entirely iron out all the logical inconsistencies, or is there sometimes where you're like, I'll just let this one in?
Sometimes I will allow one to stay because I know that the reader will never be able to figure it out, because there's some information that I have as the author that I didn't include in the story. And so like I might know something, I'm like, oh, well, I know this little bit that kind of would turn this little thing on its head, but the reader won't ever know that. And so it's fine.
Do you like study archetypes or myths, or is there some kind of literature that you can engage in that you feel like sort of provides life to your characters, or like gives you maps into different types of characters or stuff?
Um, I wouldn't say that I study anything necessarily, as I do as I pay attention to other stories, um, and especially ones that are like that people find most meaningful, like scripture, Bible, and because that's just full of archetypes. And in learning even other mythology, uh, and and all of that, there's when you pay attention and you've when you've actually like learned about the archetypes of, like, the archetype of the father, the archetype of what is like the jester or the joker, um or the fool, like, the fool precedes the king,
Right.
those sort of things. And so I have learned about those things in listening to Jordan Peterson. And so then with that uh with that vocabulary, then it makes those archetypes in other media that I watch a lot more salient. They become much more clear, and then I can pay attention to that, and just pay attention to how those characters in other stories, how they play out. And and so it kind of creates a very strong subconscious understanding of all of those archetypes, which I can then kind of draw from in whatever I'm doing.
How, at the core level, like what the character, like what your relationship is with the character. Is the character complex and baroque with sort of counterpoint moving parts and like features, or is the character at the deepest level some ineffable quality that you're interacting with, where at the deepest level it's a thing which is not described? Is it like um um a bunch of moving parts, or is it like one thing?
I want to say it's a mix of both, which sounds extremely contradictory and not very sensical. Um, I'm trying to figure out how I would justify saying it's kind of a mix of both. I mean, it's and they're ineffable in the sense I that I don't fully know them, because I also don't fully know myself. And so that's, I think, is where things like the collective unconscious can come in. But then there are also a lot of moving parts because of the things that I do know about them. I know like their background, what kind of society they came up in, what their relationships were like in growing up. So there's details like that can form a very strong kind of mechanical buildup of why they are the way that they are, but there is still something in their core that is unknowable. And I think that's just because that's how people are.
Hmm. Mm. I sometimes I like I'm always sort of um like this is the way I think and I process or I talk is like I just sort of like wait for things to this is the way Jordan Peterson described it. Wait for things to bubble to the surface and then I'll say them.
Mm.
So sometimes you know, I'll get to a point where like I'm sort of seeing possible things I could say, but they don't like they don't feel, you know, salient. So that's I'm just describing why
Hmm.
I had a moment of not
No,
saying
you're good.
anything.
You're good. I mean, sometimes, yeah, sometimes you do need a moment to just kind of let things
Hmm.
let them bubble up.
Do you have that in your hmm, do you have places where sort of structures okay, this is what I was wondering. Um does your characters match your life? Like so like because you're describing sort of a process where they're going through where they're dealing with these issues. One of them is going from atheist to theist, and one of them is going from theist to atheist. They can't can they do is that what you're going through sort of simultaneously somehow oxymoronically both things at the same time or
Okay. Yeah, so like you're kind of like asking like if I have gone through a similar kind of arc that they've been going through. Um,
or yeah.
yeah, okay. Not really. There's kind of a little bit of me in in each of them in varying ways. For instance, the atheist character. So, like, what I find myself in the atheist character is he has a very strong aversion to hypocrisy. And that's by and large why he's been an atheist, because he has grown up in a very religious society that's trying to be very pushy on him to believe the way they believe. And he has a very strong aversion to that, especially so because one of the particular character qualities that the main character has is he kind of has a perfect memory. And so he's read the entirety of their scriptures and he remembers every single bit of it. At any time, he can bring up any verse from it word for word. He knows it, he's got it in his head. And as a result of that, any time that some clergyman or other is like trying to preach or teach about their religious beliefs and whatnot, he can always pinpoint when whatever they're talking about is nonsense, when they're coming up with their own ideas or interpretations of what's like in their scripture. And so he just ends up seeing hypocrisy all over the place, and he doesn't like that. And that I have that kind of sense within me as well. And because I get very annoyed whenever I listen to someone trying to teach something that's like within the Christian world, and I'm just like, that is not what the scripture was saying at all. And so yeah, there's that sense that that there's parts of me in each of them, and in just different ways. But for the most part, they are still kind of their own person. And so they haven't so much they haven't so much as kind of followed in the sort of things that I've experienced. And I do bring a lot of my experience into them, but it's not. it's not so one for one. There's still quite a large degree of separation between who I am, what I've learned, and what I've gone through, and what the characters are. And I think that's an important thing to do as a writer, because you don't want them too much like yourself, because that can, well, it just becomes a self-insert. And a lot of people can sometimes recognize self-insert and go, this is silly.
Um, is it set in like our current modern day age, or is it like a? Because
It's a,
I guess it can't be, right? Because it has magic and stuff.
yeah, it's a, it's not, okay. That's sort of a, well, the physically, geography wise, it's actually set in central United States. That's actually the geography, because I just decided I don't want to mess around with making a map and everything. This is Earth. They're on Earth,
Right.
and it's based largely in central United States, because that makes mapping things out really easy. And I wanted to make that part easy on myself. Um, and so there's kind of tiny little hints here and there that, yeah, they're on the same Earth that we are on, but at like a completely different time, either like way in the future or way in the past. And so, but to more kind of answer the question, like what's the period of it? It is kind of more on the medieval side, but they do still have certain kind of more modern um, conveniences like plumbing. Plumbing is a thing within the world, but guns aren't.
Oh, guns are not a thing. Interesting.
They are in the
It's
sequel,
magic.
though. They're becoming a thing in the sequel. That's one development that I'm excited about.
How did it become a thing?
Through magic. There's a character who is just really frustrated with circumstances happening in the world, that she needs to kill someone, and so she goes and uses her magic power to invent a gun. And yeah, I'm excited for what's going to happen there.
Wow. Your world feels so full and immersive. Every time you talk about it, I get really interested in what in your world.
Thank you. I still feel like I have a lot of things about it that I haven't fully figured out or fleshed out, but yeah, world building is kind of a monster all on its own.
Now, do you find any utility in like I'm thinking about Peterson Academy and how writing could like benefit. I know there was a writing club, but like is there a sort of a way I remember hearing sort of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien would sit down and talk about things and then I think yeah and they sort of there must be something. This is what I've thought. Something to do with them hanging out and then both being good writers. I don't think they were both super famous when they started hanging out. Um, do you think there's a way that that could be facilitated on the academy where people could hang out and like sort of build together?
That's a Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. We would have to figure out like a we'd have to get it like really nice and structured. Um, Actually, I am a co-host to a writing group just locally in a town over from me, and um, we have very this time on the first and third Saturdays or Thursdays of the month, and so those are the times that we meet, and so it's very structured in that sense. And um, because I feel like that sort of thing is really tough to be able to do in a spontaneous kind of sense. And yeah, so like someone would have to be able to organize it, and there'd have to be enough repeated uh repeated interest in pursuing that. I think
Hmm.
it could be done, and I'd actually be really interested in doing something like that. I think that would be really fun. Um, but yeah, it would be a matter of kind of figuring out the logistics and the structure of it, and because you know, people at Peterson Academy were all over the world, we're all over the place, and so it's that can make that sort of thing a little bit difficult.
What subjects on Peterson Academy are you interested in?
Oh, um, I think most of the classes I've been looking at are more on the humanities side.
Hmm.
Um, I've been going through um, Professor Hicks' logic, and that one's been very interesting. Um, I want to get through all of Vervaeke's courses because I love Vervaeke. I think around halfway through his Maps of Meaning playlist on YouTube, and um,
Vervaeke has a Maps of Meaning playlist on
oh,
YouTube.
sorry, not Maps of Meaning, Meaning Crisis.
Okay, 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 yeah,
Both of them have meaning in there, so I got it
yeah,
mixed up.
yeah.
Um, and I'm also really interested in Rob Henderson's. I think it's the what does they call it? The psychology or the social status, social hierarchy one. Do, 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 do.
Oh,
Oh yeah, the psychology of social status. That one. That one's I'm really interested in. I really like Rob Henderson's work.
so um, and how far are you in music?
Um, I actually did. I've watched the first episode of Music's Theory with Samuel.
Oh,
Um,
I meant like how
but
far is,
you're talking more in general.
yeah, you, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. That I've kind of been in the same place with it almost all my life, which is I play by ear. I have never really been able to read sheet music, and so I kind of muscle memory and feel of it. Um, and um, it's it's m mostly been a very expensive hobby. But I am kind of I have actually like produced certain like completed pieces of music that I thought were good enough that I threw them onto Spotify, although most of them are probably not really good enough to be on Spotify, but they're still there anyway. Um, and one album that I did was just kind of a Native American flute album, which is just kind of for relaxation, meditation sort of thing. Because my mom's a huge fan of Native American flutes and that kind of relaxing, meditative music. And so she's like, "Make another flute album, Chris. You got it. I'm looking forward to it." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, okay." And so I've been that's what I've actually been working on in the music world is I've been um, trying to make more Native American flute pieces because I also really enjoy that. They're really fun to make and they're also pretty easy to make because you can kind of do you can you can kind of just get into a flow state of just playing and your whole goal is really just to try not to be too repetitive and that's it. And so it's fairly simple in putting together.
Hmm. Do you do you ever like focus on the aesthetic part of writing? Because I remember reading Edgar Allan Poe, and he's like a romantic writer, and I had this feeling like I was reading his stuff, and then it was creating feelings that I sort of couldn't describe. And I was like, there was something about just like the way it wasn't the characters, it wasn't the story, it wasn't the plot. It was just like everything together had this feeling, very generally very dark feeling, but something ineffable. Is that do you like create like those sort of feeling spaces? Because I'm just saying this because like when you describe music like playing the Native American flute and sort of not having a theoretical background but doing it by feel, like that is something entirely kind of this place where you're just creating a feeling atmosphere. And I'm
Mm.
wondering like to what degree your musical talents play into writing, if there's the connection between that process.
Yeah, sometimes there are, by and large, I don't write out of a place of trying to create a particular feeling, but every once in a while I'll hit a part in the story where I feel very strongly that that is what I need to do. Um, and usually it's when beauty is really important, where
Mm,
I'm trying to show something beautiful, and so I'll get more descriptive and I'll try to use wording in such a way that is really trying to paint a picture, really trying to create a feel. Um, and that can also come out in not even just moments that are trying to show beauty, but also moments that are maybe like more tense. And so there's
mm.
something happening where I'm like, okay, this is a really high tension moment. I want the readers to be maybe a little bit scared of what is happening. Then, yeah, there are um, kind of writing techniques for getting that across. So I might try to do that, like usually shorter sentences, a little bit more punchier. And
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I've thought about this. Like in writing, there's so many tools to work with. And I wonder what degree they can play a role on the reader, and what degree you can actually manipulate them. Because like I could imagine that like if you subtly do something and the reader doesn't know what's happening, but you're doing it subtly, like what if you're like subtly rhyming words a bit? It maybe creates like a soft feeling, or like
yeah,
or you're creating sentences like maybe this is technically according to the English language like incorrect, but you're making more like disjoint sentences. Maybe it would put the reader in a state of like kind of like frustration or something, or you know.
yes. There's a book that I once came across at the library called "The Elements of Eloquence" by Mark Forsyth, and I when I started going through it, what he's doing in the book is he is giving very um, obscure words that describe very particular writing techniques, and that a lot of it was things that I knew, but he was giving very solid descriptions and examples for all of these different techniques, and all of things like that. And I really recommend the book, The Elements of Eloquence. It's really good. You can use these techniques to do things like that. For I've got some of the examples that I wrote down on my phone because I wanted to remember them. Let me pull one of these up real quick because
For sure.
they it works better when you have a good example. Okay. Um, one of these weird words is called hendiadys. Very strange, but it's where you turn an adjective noun into a noun, which is an example is so like you don't walk through the noisy rain. That's adjective noun. Noisy rain, adjective noun. So you don't do that. You walk through the noise and the rain. So now they're both nouns. So you've taken the adjective and you've turned it into a noun and you're using it like
Oh.
that. So that's hendiadys. That's what that is.
Does it describe what the effect of doing that is? Like, why would you, when would you, could you have a conscious way to implement that, or?
Um, that I think, depending on how you're using it, I think it can evoke different things. I think it largely depends on the context and like, because I feel like you could use that in very poetic fashion. You could probably even do something using that technique to even do something like more on the horror side of things. I'm not sure
Yeah,
of
well,
whether.
there's not necessarily a reason for it to to
Yeah.
describe the use of it. Like this is kind of what I was describing in the way music works is like music doesn't necessarily give you a mathematical formula of what you should do. Understanding musical theory just kind of describes the landscape. It's like, well, what are the options? Like what
Mm,
just knowing that that Honditis thing is an option means that like you can then consciously go, okay, well, what am I doing? And you have that like repertoire
hmm.
then.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it really is important, especially if you're trying to write something that is going to catch the attention of readers, because like a lot of like all these different techniques that the elements of eloquence goes over are in many ways very clever ways of writing that are usually they're not like something that's difficult to understand. It's something that just pops out and can make the reader go, "That was nice. Like that's a cool thing there." Like um, another example. This is probably one of the most popular ones is alliteration,
Right.
and alliteration is just you're starting a lot of your words with the same kind of sound. So like the dog drags his master Dracula. A lot of D in there.
Hmm.
And so those those methods are you see that sort of thing used a lot for like titles. A lot of
Hmm.
titles will be like that. I'm using that sort of technique for like the title of the sequel. The first book is The Voice of a Mute. It's not much alliteration there, but the sequel is The Voice of Victory. So two V's. So I'm using that in there.
This is then an actual, like, this is actually a way of sort of starting to map out writing.
Yep.
Because I'm wondering if, like, if you go in and you read, like, literary greats like Edgar Allan Poe, if you'd notice, like, them invoking these different techniques. Another thing I'm thinking about is, like, well, what if you use words that, like, part of their etymology is something or okay, this is another thing I was thinking about. This one maybe depends on if you read it sort of out loud or to yourself, but like the harshness of the sound of the word, like the k sound or like a sh sound, like if you have a lot of sh sounds, like if it if it makes a softer feeling for the writer versus a lot of jarring sounds. Like I don't know. I'm just wondering if like what dimensions you can employ to
Yeah,
create
and
these feelings.
those sort of methods are used very very much in poetry because poetry is meant to be spoken out loud, and so those sort of things do get used for that very purpose. Um, and one of the things I is really great about the elements of eloquence is the author gives you examples from things like poetry or Greek literature. He uses the Bible actually quite a lot to show, yeah, even the Bible uses all of these techniques. Um,
Interesting.
and yeah, so he does a really great job of giving like showing what is the technique and lots of well-known places where it has been applied in. Like Shakespeare does a ton.
Okay, this is another concept that I've been playing with in music, which is that like maybe a definition for beauty is like how many ideas are layered on top of each other. So you could have a character, you'll see this in like symbolism quite frequently where like a symbol will mean things at different levels. So something happens. This is what like good jokes oftentimes do, is where like something is happening on this verbal level, but it's also happening on kind of like the interpretive level, one layer down. And like it's funny because you're seeing all these different ways that it's saying something a bit deeper. And I I I kind of wonder what the upper limits of that are. Like what would happen if you took a piece of writing, and must be what poetry actually is, some poetry at least. What would happen if you took a piece of writing and you did that like you did so many different layers, like the words, the etymology of the words, the sound of the words in relation to the other places, and of course like potentially alliteration or rhyming. And you started like sort of stacking up sort of layers of meaning where, as you're describing something negative, you have harshness in the words, you have rhyming in a certain way, and then over here you do different alliteration, and like that process of like stacking things up. I don't know.
Yeah, um, it it takes a good deal of mastery to do that sort of thing. I don't know that I could even. I don't know how much I could speak to that because I don't know that I've quite reached that level. Um, but I think you are getting to something important that writers should want to be able to strive towards. Like you you want to be able to you want to be a master of language and being able to employ all of those different techniques and that multi-layering, because I think in that you're able to express uh, greater truths, and sometimes they might be a little bit harder to understand, but it's like with Jesus's parables. Those are I would think those are a fairly good example. um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another good example of that would be the uh the very first story in the Bible, the Garden of Eden, the tree.
oh yeah.
I think about that story so much. The tree with the snake in it. I think that symbol is just like on so many different layers. It has truth. It's like one of the most symbolically rich symbols I ever heard of, because like there's sort of the way Jordan Peterson describes the story of like, the consciousness, the women give men consciousness, which they give them self-consciousness, which is sort of this evolutionary thing. And then there's like, I think about this like actual sort of like really symbolic interpretation of it. This is what I've been thinking about recently, which is like, um, a tree of knowledge is like a structure of knowing things, and a snake is like something which exists in that tree. And this is where I think that this is actually like a core symbol to the way society functions a lot, is that you have structures of knowledge, and then systems which like play, they sit on the branches, they appear like the thing, they maybe copy it, like this is what like a con artist would do. Maybe they would appear like part of the tree, and then you kind of, you can't see it. And then I was thinking about like the symbol of the Asclepies, where it's like, well, then in seeing the Asclepies, which is like the snake on a pole, that's equivalent to like literally seeing the snake in the tree of the Garden of Eden. And like this symbolic connection where it's like that symbol is happening there, but it's also happening later in the story where the symbols are like rhyming with each other. So you have the words that are, this is what I'm thinking about, like stacking meaning. Like you could have words that are rhyming with each other, and you could have like symbols that are rhyming with each other, where the symbol, when you initially look at it on its face, it has meaning. And then also in relation to the other parts of the thing, it has meaning. It's a very musical way of analyzing it.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm. The I think the thing that yeah, that's one of the I'm actually trying to kind of play with a lot garden imagery as well, like with the heaven versus hell story that I've been working on. Um, in when I began rewriting it, uh, I decided I want to integrate that sort of thing in the beginning for it as well. So they're kind of they end up the story starts in an enclosed garden, and there's a big oak tree. There's like this one particular tree that the characters end up being gathered around at a certain point. And they're encircled by cliffs, and so they're kind of they don't really have a way out except a cave that I don't, maybe this is sacrilegious. I don't really know what this means. I don't know what I'm doing with how I wrote this, but the only way that they're actually able to get out is to go through a cave that is shaped like a snake. Like the walls are scaled, and so it looks like this, like the scales of a snake, and that's the only, they have to pass through that to get out of there and into the rest of the world.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I'm like,
Wow.
I don't know really quite what that means, but I just thought, okay, I think that there's something there.
That is exactly what I'm talking about. Like where literally that story is like very clearly rhyming with the Garden of Eden story, which is a foundational enough story that like I think there's some sort of literary rhyming. Like if you're rhyming with some other literary work, where if you do it, it's not going to be, people aren't going to know it. So you have to, it has to be at a certain academic level for people. Like you have to have an audience that's super academic for them to get it. But like the Garden of Eden, that's one that like clearly people would know. That's very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really fun to do things like that, to take those really layered and well-known things and
Wow.
play with them a little bit and try to figure out
Wow.
something a little bit different.
Because you have so much meaning in that original story. It's just like it's like just packed with meaning. And then doing that, like taking the symbol and then just, well, let's just change it a little bit, see what happens. It suddenly like reshapes it. I mean, like I could sort of say the interpretations I see when you say that, but I think it's more, I don't know, it's quite a large thing.
Yeah, yeah, and that really is the struggle, as being the kind of writer that I am, is like I do things, I don't really know what I'm doing, and I don't really know how to explain super well what it might mean. It is what it is, and I allow the reader's interpretation to be up to them on some things.
I find that very interesting, very exciting. Well, I think that I want to, I don't know, sort of sit with some of these ideas. Um, and then I don't know if you'd want to do another conversation later, I'd be interested, but if you're up for it.
I'd be happy to, for sure.
Fantastic. All right.
So
Um,
seems like we had a good stopping point.
yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much for doing it.
Yeah, well, thank you. This has been fantastic. So I look forward to next time we're talking, and